It was a business deal with a 98% failure rate, and he was the fool who wrote the clauses. For 36 months, she played her part perfectly, the elegant, temporary wife. The contract was clear, the money was transferred, and tonight she was supposed to walk away. But when she reached for the penthouse door, he didn't ask her to stay, he begged. This is Yi Hyun Park, heir to the Park One Group, a man who solved every problem with a contract. And Ilara Vance, the brilliant strategist he hired for a single role, to be his convincing, temporary wife. For 3 years, they performed a flawless deception for his traditional family, but the greatest lie wasn't for them. It was the one they told themselves, that hearts could be governed by clauses and termination dates. And as the final day arrived, one of them was about to break the only rule that mattered. The blueprint for this heartbreak wasn't written in a corporate law office. It was born 2 decades ago in a television studio in Seoul from a simple, ruthless question. What if you could buy a solution to your biggest problem? In 2003, a drama called 1% of Anything answered with a premise that would quietly rewrite the rules of romantic storytelling. A wealthy heir, pressured by his grandfather's will to marry, strikes a deal with a kind-hearted schoolteacher. A contract is signed. Emotions are supposedly excluded. It was the first major shot in a cultural revolution that would turn contractual love into a billion-dollar narrative engine. But why did this specific lie resonate so deeply? To understand that, you have to look at the pressure cooker of Korean family dynamics. The concept of face, or kimyeon, the weight of filial duty, the intricate dance of inheritance in family-run conglomerates known as kibols. For a son like Yi Hyun Park, his value was often a spreadsheet, a calculation of lineage, alliance, and corporate stability. Love was a variable, not a constant. The contract marriage trope didn't invent this tension. It simply gave it a door labeled business transaction through which a writer could smuggle in the messy, inconvenient truth of real human connection. So the formula crystallized. One party, usually the man, needs to appease a dying relative, secure an inheritance, or thwart a business rival. The other party, often a woman in a precarious position, needs money, security, or escape. They negotiate terms, they sign on the dotted line, no feelings, no romance, a clean, clinical solution. And the audience leans in, knowing with absolute certainty that the first clause to be shattered will be the one about the heart. This is the foundational promise of the genre, the slow, excruciating, delicious burn of a lie becoming truth. But here's what the early dramas missed. They were almost exclusively Korean stories for a Korean audience. The faces on screen, while beloved, represented a single shade of a much wider human experience. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, a different kind of yearning was taking shape. In the United States, studies like the infamous OkCupid data from 2009 revealed a brutal hierarchy of attraction. Asian men and Black women were consistently ranked at the bottom. For Black women who grew up on a diet of anime, martial arts films, and later, the soaring global wave of K-pop, this created a dissonance. The media they consumed featured men they found compelling, but the media around them told them they were invisible to those same men. Out of that gap, a genre was born. AMBW, Asian Man, Black Woman. It began in the quiet corners of the internet, on fan fiction forums, self-published novels, and eventually YouTube. This wasn't just about romance. It was a reclamation. A statement that Black women could center themselves in narratives of desire with Asian men, not as sidekicks or stereotypes, but as protagonists. They could have it all, the thoughtful, devoted partner from the dramas they loved, and their own beauty, intelligence, and culture reflected back at them. It was, as researchers have called it, a safe space built from unmet social desire and the need to be seen. For years, these two powerful currents, the K-drama contract trope and the AMBW creation space, ran in parallel streams. They shared emotional DNA but rarely met on screen. Mainstream Korean television, while exploding globally, remained largely homogeneous in its casting. The AMBW stories lived in indie webcomics and low-budget YouTube shorts, but the audience was there, hungry and waiting. They were fluent in the language of K-drama tension, but starved for a reflection of their own cross-cultural reality. The stage was set for a collision. Into the algorithm. In the late 2010s, Platforms like YouTube and Netflix began to connect these dots. A viewer who watched Business Proposal or Because This Is My First Life would be served a video essay on the best contract marriage K-dramas. That viewer might then be a black woman who'd search for AMBW story, and the algorithm, in its cold, logical way, would see a pattern. A pattern of engagement, of deep, repeat viewing. Content creators, always chasing the next viral niche, saw it too. They began to fuse the two. The high-stakes, polished tension of the K-drama with the intimate, representational power of AMBW storytelling. This is where our story truly begins. In a modern penthouse, not just as a set piece, but as a symbol. It represents the apex of the Keibal world. Yi Hyun comes from polished, cold, and imposing, and into this world walks Ilara Vance. She is not a struggling schoolteacher or a plucky journalist from the old tropes. She is a strategist, a professional. She understands the contract because she likely helped draft its real-world equivalents. Her composure, her elegance, is her armor. She is the idealized AMBW protagonist, capable, beautiful, and entering a world that does not know what to do with her. Their agreement is a piece of modern fiction, but it's built on 20 years of very real audience training. We know the beats, the family dinners where she must impress, the accidental touches, the lingering looks when the other isn't watching, the slow dismantling of the wall between performance and person. But the writers of these new stories added a crucial, devastating twist. In the classic trope, both parties usually fall in love, often simultaneously. The new wave, however, began to explore a more painful asymmetry. What if one person, usually the one who drafted the contract, the one who believed they held all the power, was the only one who fell? What if the other person, the professional, did their job flawlessly and was ready to leave? This shifts the entire emotional architecture. It's no longer about mutual discovery. It's about tragic, unilateral realization. It turns the contract from a plot device into a prison of one's own making. Yi Hyun Park is that modern tragedy. He applied the logic of his world, the logic of acquisitions, mergers, and controlled outcomes to the human heart. He sourced the perfect candidate. He defined the scope of work. He set the milestone payments and the termination date. He managed the stakeholders, his parents, the board, society. The project was on schedule and under budget, until the only metric that wasn't in the statement of work quietly became the only one that mattered. This is the first major turning point. Not the signing, but the moment the architect looks at the flawless building he commissioned and realizes he's built his own home, just as the contractor is packing her tools. And so we arrive at the precipice. The 36 months are up. The final payment is triggered. Ilara Vance, having fulfilled every clause, stands in the doorway of the penthouse. The document in her hand isn't a contract anymore, it's a receipt, a certificate of completion. For her, this is the end of a successful engagement. For Yi Hyun, it is the instant he discovers a catastrophic flaw in his own design. The system has worked perfectly, and it has destroyed him. He is about to learn the hardest lesson his world never taught him. You cannot negotiate for real love, but you can, in one raw, unscripted moment, beg for it. But what happens when the performance ends and only one person is left on stage? The contract is over, the door is open, and in the silence of a deal concluded, a single, irrevocable word hangs in the air. Bergi. That word, raw and unscripted, is the sound of the contract tearing in half. It is the moment the trope stops being a story and starts being a weapon. And in that single syllable, we can trace the entire, intricate escalation of this narrative machine. Because the real question isn't what happens next in the penthouse. It's what this moment of fictional desperation has been training millions of real people to feel, and more importantly, to crave. Let's rewind just slightly. To understand how we got to that plea, we have to map the emotional algorithm of the contract arc. The first 6 months are a dance of pure performance. This is where the AMBW genre flexes its specific muscles. The scenes are crafted not just for romance, but for vindication. The black female lead, often an outsider, navigates the intricate social codes of a traditional Korean family dinner. She doesn't just pass the test, she redefines it. Her elegance, her wit, her quiet confidence in the face of subtle, or sometimes blatant, prejudice becomes a cathartic fantasy for an audience that knows that sting in reality. Every approving nod from an initially skeptical mother, every impressed glance from a stern father, is a collective win for every viewer who has ever felt othered. But the performance must have cracks. The first crack is usually accidental intimacy, a shared umbrella in a sudden downpour, an unexpected touch while reaching for the same document, a nightmare that leads one party to seek comfort in the other's room. These are the narrative pressure points, and they are deployed with surgical precision. In the world of YouTube analytics, these are the peak retention moments. Creators track them in real time, the moment the male lead's hand hesitates before pulling away. The second the female lead lets her professional mask slip to show a flicker of real worry. These microbeats are the hooks that drive the watch next click, and they are engineered to mirror the addictive quality of the K-drama episode cliffhanger. Then comes the midpoint milestone, a family crisis, a business rival's attack, a public scandal where they must present a united front. This is where the fake relationship proves its functional worth, saving face or securing a deal, but in doing the job they cross a threshold. They see each other's competence under fire. They become a team. The contract, in a beautiful irony, works too well. It creates a genuine bond forged in shared struggle. This is the point of no return. And it's exactly here that the narrative splits into two distinct schools of thought within the AMBW creator community. The first school is the pure fantasy model. Here, the focus is on wish fulfillment and emotional safety. The conflict is external, the scheming ex, the evil chairman, the disapproving parents. The love between the leads, once acknowledged, is unwavering. It's a sanctuary. This model dominates platforms like Wattpad and in self-published romance novels, where the primary goal is to provide a consistent, affirming escape. The comment sections are filled with hearts and declarations of, "This is my comfort story." The second school is the realistic angst model. This is where our penthouse story lives. Here, the creators inject a more brutal psychological honesty. The central conflict isn't outside the couple, it's the asymmetry within the relationship itself. One person, usually the man who initiated the contract, begins to feel real emotions but is trapped by the very rules he set. The other person, the hired partner, remains professional or worse, begins to care but is too proud or too guarded to admit it. This model is grittier, more painful, and often more popular on YouTube, where serialized tension drives weekly returns. It asks a harder question: what if the person you paid to stand by your side becomes the only person you can't live without, and they see your love not as a gift, but as a breach of contract? This asymmetry is the rocket fuel of the second act, and to escalate it, the narrative must introduce what storytellers call the ticking clock. In classic K-drama, this might be the terminal illness of the grandfather. In the modern AMBW web series, it's often the literal contract end date or the arrival of a real romantic prospect for one of the leads. The clock makes every tender moment bittersweet. A shared laugh is undercut by the knowledge that there are only 30 days left. A thoughtful gift is weighed against the final payment due. This is where the business of content creation collides with the art of storytelling. The ticking clock is a perfect mechanism for season finales and mid-season breaks, driving subscribers to hit the notification bell so they don't miss the resolution. But the stakes must escalate beyond the personal. The narrative must threaten the very foundation of the characters' worlds. Enter the third party. In our archetypal story, this is often the approved match, the daughter of a business partner, the childhood friend from a good family, someone who represents the correct path the male lead is supposed to take. Her arrival does two things. First, it forces the hired wife to witness the life she was only ever temporarily occupying. Second, it forces the male lead to actively choose. And in choosing the hired wife over the approved match, he isn't just breaking a social rule, he's potentially torching a business alliance, risking his inheritance, and defying his family's legacy. The personal betrayal now carries a corporate price tag. This is where the documentary peels back the curtain. We move from the story to the spreadsheet. The explosion of this niche has created a microeconomy. Successful AMBW web series on YouTube can generate six figures annually through AdSense, sponsorships for dating apps or Korean skincare products, and Patreon subscriptions offering early access. The most popular creators aren't just writers, they are showrunners, hiring actors, directors, and editors. They analyze their demographics. A significant portion of their viewership is not Black or Asian, but white and Latina women who are drawn to the specific flavor of romantic tension. The algorithm, indifferent to race but hyper-tuned to engagement, propels these stories to a global audience. And with that audience comes scrutiny. The realistic angst model, in particular, draws criticism. Some cultural commentators argue that these stories, while created by black women, can inadvertently reinforce painful stereotypes. The black female lead's journey is often one of proving her worth to a wealthy Asian family, a narrative that can feel like seeking validation from a system of old money exclusivity. The Asian male lead, while devoted, can sometimes fall into the cold CEO trope, whose emotional thaw is the prize. The question is raised: is this progressive representation, or is it simply painting old power dynamics with a new interracial brush? The creators fire back. They point to the comments where black women write, "I finally feel seen." They highlight storylines where the black lead's culture is celebrated, not erased, where she cooks a dish from her homeland for the family and it becomes a new favorite. They argue that they are writing within a beloved genre and expanding its boundaries, which is a form of power. The debate is fierce, personal, and fundamentally about who gets to tell stories and for whom. Now let's apply this heat to our specific couple. Yi Hyun's breakdown at the door isn't just an emotional climax, it's a corporate liability. In the real world of a cable heir, every move is watched. A public relationship with a foreign contract wife is a scandal. A public meltdown over her departure is a crisis. We must now escalate to the institutional consequences. The board of directors would be convened. Family offices, those discrete entities that manage the wealth and reputations of the ultra-rich, would swing into action. Their goal, containment. The narrative must be controlled. Was she a gold digger? Was he unstable? The machinery of reputation management is designed to grind personal truth into palatable fiction. For Ilara, the stakes are different but equally severe. Her professional reputation as a strategist is built on discretion and results. If the truth of her contractual role leaks, she is not a tragic heroine, she is a paid escort in the eyes of a judgmental industry. Her ability to get future work evaporates. The money from the contract, which might have been her seed funding for a new start, becomes tainted. And on a human level, she is now the villain in someone else's tragedy, the woman who coldly walked away from a man bearing his soul. In the court of online opinion, which side will the audience take? The man who foolishly fell in love with his own scheme, or the woman who did the job she was paid for? This brings us to the major pivot of Act 2. We've assumed this is a story about love versus contracts. But what if that's the wrong frame? What if the real, unsettling revelation is that for the audience, the contract isn't the obstacle to love, it's the prerequisite? The cold, transactional premise makes the eventual emotional surrender feel more earned, more real. The audience doesn't trust love that comes easy. They trust love that fights its way through a labyrinth of clauses and penalties. The contract isn't the lie, it's the truth serum. It forces characters into an honesty of circumstance that then breeds honesty of feeling. The most addictive part of the story isn't the confession. It's the slow, excruciating process of two people trying to outsmart a deal that has already outsmarted them. We are now at the bridge. The personal, cultural, and economic threads are pulled taut. Yi Hyun's plea hangs in the digital air, a data point in a vast ocean of similar fictional pleas. Ilara's hand is on the doorknob, a moment frozen across 1,000 thumbnails. But outside the frame of their story, a real-world phenomenon is reaching its own tipping point. The niche is becoming mainstream. Netflix is taking notes. Traditional Korean production companies are eyeing the engagement numbers. The very authenticity that fueled the AMBW creator space is now a marketable asset to be acquired, sanitized, and repackaged. And this forces the ultimate meta question: what happens when the algorithm that was built on yearning starts to manufacture that yearning on an industrial scale? When the contract marriage trope, born from a specific cultural pressure, gets globally remixed, does it lose its soul, or does it find a new one? The door to the penthouse is about to swing open, and what walks out will change the story forever. Not just for Yi Hyun and Ilara, but for everyone who has ever hit play on a lie they desperately wanted to believe. The final escalation is not in the script, it's in the audience's reality, and it's just beginning. The door did open, but what followed wasn't a scene from the script, it was a security breach. In the world of Akibol Air, a private emotional breakdown is a public relations grenade with the pin already pulled. And in our modern parable, the pin was pulled by a device no contract could have anticipated, a smart doorbell camera. The feed, clipped and stripped of audio, leaked to a gossip outlet within the hour. It showed 2 seconds of devastating pantomime. A woman backed to the camera, holding a folder. A man, his face a mask of raw anguish, one hand reaching, the other braced on a desk. The caption read, Park One-air's mystery meltdown, gold digger exit. This is the moment the narrative virus escapes containment. The fictional stakes we've been analyzing, reputation, family pressure, corporate stability, are now replaced by the real, uncontrollable chaos of a viral news cycle. The leak forces every player out of their assigned roles. Yi Hyun is no longer a tragic romantic lead. He's a trending hashtag, a meme, a boardroom liability. Ilara is no longer a professional concluding a deal. She's a mystery woman, a suspect, a target for the most vicious kind of online forensics. The fantasy collides with the internet's appetite for scandal, and the fantasy loses. But here's where the story gets even bigger. This leak didn't happen by accident in our fictional universe. It was a narrative escalation engineered by the very economic forces we just outlined. In the competitive cauldron of online content, simply following the contract marriage formula is no longer enough. Audiences, conditioned by thousands of hours of tropes, have become savants of prediction. They can sense the beats minutes before they arrive. To break through, creators must now introduce what's known as a pattern interrupt. A twist so destabilizing it resets viewer expectations. The leak of the doorbell footage is the ultimate pattern interrupt. It takes the private, intimate climax of the story and throws it into the gladiatorial arena of public opinion. It asks the audience a new, uncomfortable question. Whose side are you on when the characters stop being characters and start being headlines? This meta layer is the true escalation of Act 2B. We are no longer just watching a story about a contract marriage. We are watching a story about the consumption of a contract marriage story and how that consumption alters the story itself. The comment sections become battlegrounds. Viewers dissect Ilara's body language, frame by frame. They zoom in on Yi Hyun's expression, debating its authenticity. They scour the internet for clues about the actress who plays Ilara, blurring the line between her and the character. The algorithm, sensing the engagement spike, pushes the video and the think pieces about it to millions more. The fictional crisis generates very real advertising revenue. This is where we find the wait, it gets worse turn, because the backlash isn't just against the characters. It turns inward towards the genre itself. Cultural critics and a growing faction of the audience begin to ask a corrosive question. Are we, the viewers, the real villains? Have we become so addicted to the emotional manipulation of these asymmetrical power fantasies that we are now complicit in the public evisceration of their themes? The conversation shifts from, will they end up together, to should this story even exist? This critique gains terrifying momentum when a real-world parallel surfaces. In 2023, a scandal erupted in China around rental boyfriends, a service where women could hire attractive companions to present to their families during Lunar New Year, a direct real-life echo of the contract trope. Several high-profile arrangements ended in acrimony, blackmail, and financial ruin. Suddenly, the fictional dilemma was a cautionary tale in a business section. The fantasy had a body count. This real-life echo chamber forced the AMBW creator community into a defensive posture. Were they romanticizing a potentially exploitative dynamic? The debate ripped through Discord servers and Twitter threads, pitting creator against creator. Meanwhile, the corporate machinery we glimpsed earlier swings into full, cold operation. Yi Hyun's family office releases a statement. Mr. Park is dealing with a private family matter. The individual in question was a temporary consultant. Any suggestion of a personal relationship is categorically false. It is a masterpiece of gaslighting, using the truth of the contract to erase the truth of the emotion. They offer Ilara an additional hefty severance package with a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. The message is clear. Your version of events is for sale. Your feelings are a line item. This is the real-world application of the contract's most chilling clause, the one that says human emotion is a confidentiality breach. For Ilara, the professional strategist, this is the ultimate test. Accepting the buyout is the smart, clean, professional move. It validates her original thesis. This was a transaction, and here is its final, profitable conclusion. But refusing it, that would be an act of inexplicable financial madness. It would be a declaration that something in that penthouse was real and not for sale. Her decision becomes the central mystery of the entire narrative. The audience's desire for a romantic resolution is now at war with their respect for her professional integrity. You cannot root for her to choose love without also rooting for her to choose financial and professional suicide. This tension fractures the audience into three distinct camps, each representing a different philosophy of storytelling. Camp 1, the traditional romantics, demand a grand gesture. They want Yi Hyun to abandon his inheritance, to choose love over duty, to prove the contract wrong by setting it on fire. Camp 2, the realistic strategists, argue that Alara should take the money and run. That self-preservation is the only sane ending, and that love born from a paid arrangement is inherently tainted. Camp 3, the narrative purists, don't care about the character's happiness. They want a tragic, beautiful ending that honors the complexity of the setup. Perhaps they part forever, forever changed, a bittersweet ode to a love that was real but impossible. The creators of the story are now trapped in a prison of expectations. Whichever ending they choose, they will betray a third of their audience. The commercial pressure is immense. The most valuable asset a creator has is a satisfied, loyal fanbase. An unsatisfying ending can kill a channel, a Patreon, a career. So they do the only thing they can: they delay. They release filler episodes, side character backstories, anything to buy time while they monitor the analytics, trying to divine which ending will cause the least damaging unsubscribe spike. This stalemate is the sound of a genre hitting its logical limit. The contract marriage trope, which began as a clever way to force two people together, has become a narrative black hole. It has consumed so much emotional and intellectual energy that there is no energy left for an escape. The characters are paralyzed by the clauses. The creators are paralyzed by the metrics. The audience is paralyzed by their own conflicting desires. We have reached the peak of the escalation. There is no higher stake than the death of the story itself. And it is in this paralytic silence that a new, more dangerous question is whispered. What if the entire system is flawed? What if the problem isn't with this specific story or even this specific trope, but with the very engine that drives it? The algorithm rewards conflict, escalation, and cliffhangers. It does not reward resolution, nuance, or quiet happiness. It is a machine built for endless second acts. So, how do you write an ending in a world that only pays for the middle? We are standing at the edge of the payoff. The contract has been breached, the data has been corrupted, and the audience is holding its breath. The only way out is through a radical renegotiation, not of the terms between Yi Hyun and Alara, but of the terms between the story and us. We are about to witness what happens when a genre looks in the mirror and decides to break the glass. The renegotiation began not with a grand gesture, but with a single, silent notification. A creator, under the pseudonym Luniverse, who had built a following of over 2 million subscribers on the back of intricate AMBW contract stories, published a video with a startlingly simple title: "Why I'm Deleting My Channel." In the 12-minute video, she sat in a plain room, no makeup, no cinematic lighting, and explained the unbearable cognitive dissonance. She described the pressure to keep her fictional couples in anguish to satisfy the algorithm, while her real-life marriage, a happy, stable partnership with her Korean-American husband, felt like a betrayal of the very fantasy she sold. She said, "I started writing these stories to feel seen. Now I feel like I'm making my audience feel unseen because I'm telling them that real love has to hurt this much to be beautiful." The video went viral far beyond her niche. It was picked up by mainstream entertainment news. It became a case study, and it did something unprecedented. It broke the fourth wall between the creator economy and the emotional economy. Viewers began to comment on other contract marriage series with a new question: what is this story actually trying to say? The demand shifted, almost overnight, from endless escalation to meaningful resolution. The algorithm, ever adaptive, registered the engagement on these meta-commentaries and began to favor a new tag: satisfying ending. This was the oxygen that allowed our penthouse story to breathe again. The creators, sensing the cultural tide turning, made their bold move. They didn't choose an ending from the three expected camps. They wrote a fourth option. The next episode opened not on Yi Hyun or Ilara, but on a neutral mediator's office. Both characters, separately advised by their lawyers, had agreed to a formal dissolution of the contract. But the scene wasn't about division, it was about clarification. For 20 minutes of screen time, with a rawness that felt documentary, they talked, not as performer and client, but as two people who had shared 3 years of life. He apologized for the inhumanity of the initial proposal. She acknowledged that her professionalism had been, at times, a weapon. They discussed the leaked footage not as a scandal, but as a symptom of a relationship that existed in a funhouse mirror of public and private expectations. And then the pivot. Instead of a romantic declaration, Yi Hyun made a business proposal, a real one. He offered to invest in Ilara's own strategic consultancy, not as a payoff, but as a venture capitalist who had seen her competence firsthand. He removed himself from any operational role. The offer was clean, merit-based, and held no romantic strings. It was, in essence, the first honest contract they'd ever negotiated. Ilara, after a week of deliberation, accepted. The final season of the series then did something revolutionary. It jumped forward 2 years. We saw Ilara running a successful, growing firm. We saw Yi Hyun having stepped back from the Keebol's daily operations to lead its philanthropic arm. They were not together, but they were not estranged. They were in a quietly radical way colleagues, friends, two people who had passed through a shared fire and emerged with mutual respect, not romantic entanglement. The audience reaction was initially polarized. Then, it settled into a profound, collective exhale. The resolution was criticized by some as unromantic, but defended by many more as mature and real. It respected Ilara's autonomy and intellect as non-negotiable. It allowed Yi Hyun's growth to be about becoming a better man, not just a better boyfriend. It provided closure without fairy tale coercion. The series finale became the most watched video in the channel's history and, more importantly, had the highest completion rate. The algorithm had been fed a new data point. Resolution can be more valuable than perpetual tension. This narrative choice sent ripples through the entire niche. Other creators began experimenting with variations. Some stories ended with the couple together, but only after the power dynamic was utterly equalized, the female lead buying out the contract herself. Others ended in platonic partnership. The genre, once narrowly focused on the will they won't they of romance, expanded to ask, what does a good partnership look like in any form? The AMBW space began to produce stories about business co-founders, artistic collaborators, and childhood friends reconnecting. The contract was demoted from a central plot device to one tool among many. The real-world fallout was equally transformative. The family office's attempt to gaslight the public backfired. The stark contrast between their cold denial and the characters' nuanced, public processing in the show made the real-life corporate machinery look archaic and cruel. Yi Hyun's fictional counterparts moved towards philanthropy-sparked real shareholder activism in the actual Park One Group, with investors questioning the company's social governance. The line between fiction and reality, once blurred for exploitation, was now blurred for accountability. For the actors involved, the effects were career-defining. The actress playing Ilara, a relative unknown, was now flooded with offers for roles that specified strong, nuanced lead, not ethnic love interest. The actor playing Yi Hyun reported being sent scripts where the Asian male lead was allowed vulnerability and failure, not just stoic perfection. The show became a proof of concept that diverse casting in genre stories wasn't a risk, but an innovation that could refresh tired formulas. And now for the final, surprising detail. 1 year after the series ended, a demographic research paper was published by a Media Studies Institute. It analyzed viewing patterns across thousands of romance web series. It found a significant, unexpected correlation. Fans who had followed and appreciated the renegotiated ending of our specific Penthouse story were 30% more likely to have also watched nonfiction content about relationship therapy, communication skills, and contract law. The study cautiously posited a theory that this particular narrative, by taking the contract seriously as a framework and then thoughtfully dismantling it, had actually functioned as a form of media literacy. It didn't just entertain viewers about love. It educated them about power, consent, and the architecture of agreements in their own lives. This is the ultimate payoff. The contract marriage trope, which began as a simple engine for romantic tension, evolved through the pressure of cultural critique and creative fatigue into something far more valuable, a mirror that reflected back our own complicated desires for love, for security, for agency, and then dared to ask if the stories we were telling ourselves about those desires were helping or hurting us. The genre didn't die when it looked in the mirror and broke the glass. It grew up. It stepped through the shattered frame and found a wider world of stories on the other side. The door to the penthouse is closed now. The contract is archived, but the conversation it started is echoing in writers' rooms, in comment sections, and in the quiet moments when an audience decides what they want to feel next. The lie became real, and in doing so, it taught us how to tell a more honest truth. We are left not with a cliffhanger, but with a conclusion. A strange, satisfying, and deeply human conclusion that promises nothing except the possibility of better stories. So what do we do with this mirror now that we have it? The story of the contract marriage, from its K-drama origins to its AMBW evolution and its final, renegotiated ending, offers us more than just a tale about love. It offers a blueprint for how narratives grow up, how they start as simple escapes, become cultural battlegrounds, and can, with courage, mature into conversations. This journey from a trope to a tool shows us that the stories we consume are never just entertainment. They are rehearsals for difficult conversations about power, consent, and what we truly believe we deserve. The penthouse door may be closed, but the echo of that slammed contract is still bouncing around the world. It's in the writer's room for the next Netflix K-drama, where a producer argues for a more equitable power dynamic. It's in the analytics dashboard of an independent creator who now looks beyond retention metrics to ask if a story's resolution is ethically sound. It's in the mind of a viewer who next time sees a cold CEO trope might just pause and ask, but what does she get out of this besides heartburn? The cultural exchange here is no longer one way. It's not just Korean media going global. It's a global audience, armed with its own experiences of exclusion and desire, talking back to the genre, reshaping it, and sending new forms echoing back. The AMBW niche proved that audience hunger is a creative force. That representation isn't about filling a quota. It's about opening a valve for stories that were always there, waiting to be told. And in doing so, it challenged the original source material to be better, to be deeper, to be more honest. Our lingering question then isn't about Lee Hyun or Ilara. It's about us. What impossible deal are we living within? What invisible contract have we signed about how our own relationships should look, or hurt, or heal? The greatest power of these stories is that they give us a safe space to see the clauses in our own lives, to recognize where we might be confusing drama for depth or pain for passion. This documentary has been the story of a story, a map of how a simple fictional lie traveled across oceans and algorithms, gathered meaning, faced its own consequences, and found a more truthful way to end. That journey matters because stories are how we make sense of the human experience. And when we demand better stories, we are, in a very real way, demanding a better experience. Thank you for watching this exploration. We've woven together drama, data, and a little bit of desire to try and understand the engine of a modern myth. Now we want to hear from you. Did you side with the traditional romantics, the realistic strategists, or the narrative purists? Or did the final, renegotiated ending speak to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This conversation is only as rich as the voices in it. If this deep dive into the stories behind the stories resonated with you, please give this video a like. It helps us immeasurably. And if you want to join us as we unpack more viral narratives, from the true crime boom to the rise of cozy gaming, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We are just getting started, and we would love for you to be part of this community of curious storytellers and story analyzers. Until next time, keep questioning the plot.